Hello, Bio 130 students. This will be the muscular skeletal system, skeletal muscular system, the muscular and skeletal system. Technically a system of two body systems, but more or less the skeleton and the muscles, they can be grouped together. So musculoskeletal or skeletal muscular, either or. As far as this goes, it consists of, the skeletal system and the muscular system. And the skeletal system, it does a great job at essentially providing a framework to support your body so that you can actually move. And in some cases, it protects your organs and does some physiological functions like storing calcium for when you need it, or hematopoiesis, which is your body producing the blood cells that circulate in your bloodstream. And the muscular system, that pulls on your bones and everything to allow you to move, react, to do stuff. Let's start breaking these down. For the skeletal system, you have two main regions of skeleton. You have the axial and the appendicular, and they have some variety in functions. And just getting into the axial, this is basically the parts of the skeleton that's main purpose is to protect your brain, to protect your lungs and heart, and to protect your spinal cord. So that's why the axial skeleton consists of the skull, the vertebral column, you can also refer to it as the spine, and also the thoracic cage, aka the rib cage. These are their main purpose is really just to protect the vital organs you absolutely need. Some people, they don't need a second kidney, but it definitely hampers your ability to function if you're down a lung, or if you have a lot of brain damage to your brain or a lot of damage to your heart. Therefore, the axial skeleton focuses on those three primary organs, which you definitely need. Now, that's the axial skeleton. The appendicular skeleton, and we're just going to keep it basic. We're not going to get too intense because this is not anatomy and physiology. This is just basic human anatomy. The appendicular skeleton, instead of being primarily for protection, it is primarily to allow our appendages to function, whether to use our legs to walk or to use our arms and hands to grab, to react, to move away, things like that. So not so much to protect our vital organs, but to just allow us to get about. So the appendicular skeleton, the three main parts that you should know for this class is that the appendicular skeleton consists of the shoulders, which are called the pectoral girdle. So sort of like the collarbone and the shoulder blades. They also consist of the upper and lower limbs, which would be the arms and legs, the bones of those appendages, as well as the pelvic girdle or the hip bones, where the axial skeleton, its lowest part is the lowest end of the spinal column. The pelvic bone, the pelvic girdle, the hip bones, that is just the appendicular skeleton. So that's a distinction between those two. Now, you also have two different types of bones, flat bones and long bones. Now, as far as flat bones, these are what consists of these are what build the skull, your ribs, your pelvis. They are they have a somewhat spongy, cancellous portion, and they have an outer compact shell, which is definitely efficient at protecting organs. For example, you don't want your skull to be completely hard bone. Otherwise, if you receive a sufficient impact, a strike to the face, it would cause a lot of damage if that soft brain vital organ was hitting against hard bone. That's why as a flat bone, there's some cushion on the inside versus the more harder surface. And this is the primary site where you'll have hematopoiesis, the formation of blood cells in that spongy layer. Now, the other type of bone are long bones, and as you can see in your hands and legs, there are plenty of long bones, literally long as in a great length. Well, those are called long bones, unoriginally. Now, some examples: the humerus, which is the long bone of the arm, and the femur, which is the long bone of the leg. These also have an inner spongy compartment and an outer compact shell. And these provide a framework for your body, and they also are a site of hematopoiesis, the process of producing blood cells. Now, as far as a long bone, you can divide it into three main regions, which the absolute tips, each end of a long bone, that would be called the epiphysis, or the epiphyses if you're talking about both of them. And the longest middle portion of a long bone, that would be the diaphysis. A small region between the diaphysis and each epiphysis, that region would be called the metaphysis. And essentially, this is where the growth plates in children are. This is the part of the long bones that will grow throughout a child's life into puberty, slowly growing and becoming part of the diaphysis, or making the diaphysis longer. Now, as far as hematopoiesis, you need bone marrow to do that. There are two types of bone marrow, the red bone marrow and the yellow bone marrow. And it's pretty self-explanatory, just based off of color, what they actually do. The red bone marrow is, well, this is primarily where hematopoiesis occurs. It's red because of the large abundance of red blood cells that are being produced there, but also white blood cells are being produced. These are the immune system cells, and in truth, the only true cell of the blood cells. And then there are platelets also being produced. Now, as far as why white blood cells are the only true cell, that's because of red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Only white blood cells have all the organelles, mitochondria, nucleus, all the organelles that a proper cell should have. Therefore, these things are capable of lasting a pretty long time and finding nutrients that they need to keep continuing to do what they need to do. Red blood cells, they actually lack a few organelles, which helps them be efficient at carrying oxygen and nutrients to where they're needed without actually using them up themselves, which is why eventually they'll die and need to be replaced. And platelets, they're not even really a cell in any way, shape, or form. They are actually parts of a larger cell in the bone marrow that gets shed or ripped off, sort of as cell fragments, skin fragments of that cell that travel wherever they're needed to help close a abrasion or cut in the skin. So the only true cell is a white blood cell because it has all the organelles and it's a cell. Now, red bone marrow, this is found in flat bones and in the epiphyses of long bones. So at each tip of a long bone. As far as yellow bone marrow, this is primarily used as an area to store fat cells. And you will primarily find yellow bone marrow or fat cell containing bone marrow in the diaphyses of long bones. So in the long central portion of those bones, of the long bones. Now getting more into the muscular side of the musculoskeletal or skeletomuscular system, let's start with connective tissue, one of them being cartilage. It's made out of two proteins, which are going to be collagen and elastin, and essentially the proportion of each decides how hard or how flexible a certain connective tissue will be. Well, collagen is a fibrous protein, which gives a lot of hard structure, and elastin, well, as the name implies, is a protein that gives a lot of elastic quality. And, well, having both of these in cartilage gives it a little bit of elasticity, a little give and take, and also gives it some firm strength. These are what essentially help build things like your trachea. These are not innervated. Now that basically means that there's no real vein system. They're avascular. There's no real veins traveling in or out, or arteries traveling in or out. Essentially, if they need any materials, those nutrients or materials need to slowly diffuse into the cartilage, which takes a long time, which is why if you damage something that has a lot of cartilage in it, it takes a longer time for that to heal, for that connective tissue to heal, because there aren't veins or arteries to quickly bring those nutrients, those reparative materials into the cartilage. There's no vascular system. Now, cartilage, there are a few different types. There's hyaline cartilage, which is what is found in the larynx, the trachea, and the joints between bones. Their primary function is to help reduce friction, like the grinding between bones, or to absorb shock. Every time you walk and you're putting pressure on pushing all your bones and your legs together, well, hyaline cartilage helps protect your joints in that, or helps protect your body by working inside your joints. Now, elastic cartilage is, well, more elastic. This is found in the outer ear as well as the epiglottis. Being cartilage, it is a bit firm, but it has a higher proportion of elastin to collagen, so it has more flexibility, which is good for, say, the epiglottis, which has to flexibly cover the trachea to prevent liquid and food going down into your lungs, or the outer ear, which has to function in vibrations, which is how you actually do hear. Now, elastic cartilage, it's really just to provide a certain shape and certain supports to that actual structure, or to help support something else in the body. Like, for example, the outer ear helping to shape and support the machinery of the inner ear. And then the last type of cartilage is fibrous cartilage, which is found in intervertebral discs of the spine. So the discs lining the space between each vertebrae, as well as the pubic symphysis of the pelvic bone of the pelvis. So essentially, how there's a slight gap in the bone in your pelvis. There's some fibrous cartilage inside there, in that gap, to help keep everything nice and functional. Now, its primary functions are just to provide some rigidity and to absorb shock in the joints, or between the joints. Now, as far as joints, tendons, ligaments, things like that, there is a slight nuanced difference in all those things. And on the right is just a nice image of what tendons, ligaments, and joints really are and where they're located. And these are all different types of connective tissue. But let's get into how they vary. Ligaments, these are connective tissues that are connecting bone to bone. These help connect bone one separate bone to another separate bone. But these are lined on the outer surface of the bones. Now, tendons, these are the connective tissues that connect a muscle to a bone. These are what will help if the muscle tightens, that will pull on the tendon, which will then pull on the bone to allow you to move your arms and legs. So ligaments, they connect bone to bone, but on the outside surface of the bones. Whereas tendons connect muscle to bone. Joints are similar to ligaments in that they also connect bones to bones, but joints are going to be what the connective tissue that is directly where one bone is touching another. So directly between two different bone surfaces. And some different types of joints. Synaptoses, which are not movable. These do not actually move around. The amphiarthroses, which are slightly movable. They have a little bit of give. And then there's the diaphysis, which are well lubricated with synovial fluids. Now, cartilage, because it's not innervated, because it's avascular, going back into the fact that if cartilage gets damaged, it takes a long time for it to heal because any nutrients it would need to heal have to slowly diffuse into the actual cartilage as opposed to being quickly carried by arteries. When cartilage gets damaged too much, it can eventually lead to things like arthritis, inflammation of those connective tissues. Now, types of muscle. This will be one of the last things that we're actually going to cover. Types of muscle. You have smooth muscle, cardiac, and skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle is simply what helps build up hollow organs, and it's what actually helps build blood vessels. Has some give and take, like for example, you want your esophagus to be able to expand and contract. Otherwise, if it's rigid, you're not going to have food easily travel down it or liquid. Blood vessels, you definitely want those to have a little bit of give and take and not easily burst. Cardiac muscle, that's just simply the muscle of the heart itself. It's very good at sustaining pressure, which is very good at helping push the large volume of blood circulating through your body. And then there's the skeletal muscle, which these are the muscle that essentially are attached to bones by tendons, or I should say skeletal muscle. These are what help move bones. Let's see. These are what are attached to bones by tendons, and also attached by aponeuroses. Oh boy. Types of actual muscle. Let's see. Aponeuroses. All right. So, aponeuroses, essentially, those are, instead of tendons, if you have a lot of flat muscle, like in your abdomen or along your back, head, where the muscle is more flat, well, aponeuroses, they act like tendons. They connect the skeletal bone they connect the muscle to bone. They're just aponeuroses. They're like tendons, but for areas where the muscle is more flat, as opposed to what you would see in like your arms and legs. Now, as far as different types of muscles, as far as the functions of the different types of muscle, pardon me, as far as how your body actually controls them, I should say. Smooth muscle and cardiac muscle are thankfully involuntary. You do not actually have to think about them to use them. You don't need to think about your esophagus moving through peristalsis to help force food and liquid down into the stomach. You don't need to think about the stomach actually mechanically grinding food. And definitely, thankfully, you don't need to voluntarily think about your heart to actually make it push blood. That way we can still circulate stuff even when we're asleep. The only type of muscle that's actually truly voluntary is the skeletal muscle. And basically, we can choose whether we want our hands to close or open. We can think about whether we want to bend our arms or legs, squat down, jump, do jumping jacks, things like that. We choose to move our skeletal muscle. The cardiac and the smooth muscle, that is just on autopilot for whenever it is needed. And the different types of cells, don't worry too much about this. This is just material that you're expected to be introduced, but not material I would test you on. Let's say cells of smooth muscle, they're rather spindle-shaped, and they will typically have a single nucleus, whereas cardiac muscle, these things can look either branched or non-branched, where if they're branched, each branch essentially has one nucleus. So it will effectively be one cell that sort of has two different square heads, where each head has a nucleus. Unless it's not branched. And then there are the cells of the skeletal muscle. These are very straight chunks, and they have many nuclei inside them, which helps them to effectively think in moving very quickly if you need to move out of the way or do stuff. That's the benefit of having a lot of nuclei in just each skeletal muscle cell. And then striated, essentially striated are essentially basically if you were actually taking a anatomy and physiology class and you actually got to dissect parts of the muscle system, striations, lines going across the muscle, you would actually see with the naked eye. And essentially, these are just areas that allow those muscles to move in three-dimensional ways, like in and out, up and down, stretching, collapsing, and expanding, to give it a great range of movement, which is why we'll see striated material, striated muscles in the heart, and well, for what actually helps move our appendages. And that was a pretty long description of the skeletal system and the muscular system, which can be combined into the musculoskeletal, aka skeletal muscular system, whichever one you really start with first. And we will next go into some diseases in the next video. So at the 24-minute mark, see you all in that video.